An illegal immigrant was allegedly accidentally deported to El Salvador. And now a very different story is coming out from the White House. During a meeting between President Donald Trump, the El Salvador President Nayib Bukele, they clarified and revealed what they say actually happened with this deportation. And meanwhile, the tariff war is still ongoing, but only with China, which remains the last major holdout of the trade negotiations with Trump. And look, even Canada has come to the table. And also there's now talks of China trying to dump products onto the global market. And also in other news, Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg, he's facing an antitrust trial alongside congressional investigations, and this could see the company get broken up, and maybe other things. I'll be deep diving into these topics and more today. Let's get started. Now, first off, folks, the Trump administration has fallen into yet another scandal. It's your weekly scandal. This one has been around allegations that they accidentally deported a father to a prison in El Salvador. Sounds terrible, right? Now, various news outlets have alleged that the man is innocent, that he was wrongfully accused of being a gang member, and it gets worse. There are allegations that the Trump administration is ignoring court orders to bring the man back to the United States, who they say was, wrongfully accused. And now look, they say an innocent man separated from his family is living in kind of a hellish environment in a prison in another country. But it turns out there's a whole other side to this story that's not being told. The man had been arrested multiple times before, allegedly taken in. There's more details coming out on it. And it's alleged as well that in court, he was in fact shown twice to have been a member of the gang MS-13. The Trump administration even alleges that news outlets misrepresented the facts on the court order. Now, look, first, this is going with the main narrative. The Daily Beast, this is what they say. They say the Trump administration admitted it accidentally deported a Maryland father with protected status to a notorious El Salvador mega prison, but officials are refusing to bring him home. And the government claims the courts can't make them. It notes the individual Kilmar Abrego Garcia was one of 250 men deported to El Salvador's Secot Terrorism Center after President Donald Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. And it said despite a judge's order halting deportations, they said bring those gang members back. The administration, it says, sent 2 plane loads of Venezuelans and a separate group of El Salvadorians on March 15th. Now, that sounds terrible, right? Now, they're going to note that he came to the United States when he was 16 years old. He married a U.S. citizen. He has a son who's 5 years old who's disabled. The Daily Beast also alleges, based on a complaint from his family, that he does not have a criminal record. Now, keep in mind, that's according to his family. And it also notes a court document that says Garcia was deported through an administrative error. Now, a lot of debate around the story started with a March 31st report from The Atlantic. And here's how that all went down. The article from The Atlantic spurred an online debate, which made it sound like the Trump administration was sending an innocent person to a prison in another country. And Vice President J.D. Vance, well, guess what? He responded to that claim. And here's what he said on April 1st. J.D. Vance said, "My comment is that according to the court document you apparently didn't read, he was a convicted MS-13 gang member with no legal right to be here." And he said, "My further comment is that it's gross to get fired up about gang members getting deported while ignoring citizens they victimize." So in other words, well, the basis of the whole accusation that he was deported by air and that he was not a member of MS-13 was allegedly just caused by a journalist failing to actually read a document. But regardless, the case went through the court system and it caused a lot of sharp debates. It was used as a rallying call against the deportation policies of the Trump administration. And now, well, a very different story was just shown to the public yet again. Nayib Bukele, the president of El Salvador himself, traveled to the United States and he held a press conference at the White House yesterday. This was alongside President Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, and also other key figures in the Trump administration. Now, as you'd imagine, one of the journalists brought up the question about the case. And here's Attorney General Pam Bondi discussing the actual details of the case. Watch.
First and foremost, he was illegally in our country. He had been illegally in our country. And in 2019, two courts, an immigration court and an appellate immigration court, ruled that he was a member of MS-13 and he was illegally in our country. Right now, it was additional paperwork had needed to be done. That's up to El Salvador if they want to return him. That's not up to us. The Supreme Court ruled, President, that if, as El Salvador wants to return him, this is international matters, foreign affairs, if they wanted to return him, we would facilitate it, meaning provide a plane.
So look, as she clarified, the man was determined by two courts to have been a member of the MS-13 gang, which has now been designated a terrorist organization. And if a court says America has to bring that man back to the United States, well, here's where it gets interesting. That would require El Salvador to send the man back, and he's an El Salvador citizen. So they would have to send one of their own citizens back to the United States on an order from a U.S. court. And the other problem with it is now, again, he's part of MS-13. They've now been designated a terrorist organization, which would mean they cannot send him here, which means that El Salvador, if they were to do this, would also be sending a terrorist smuggling into the United States, which would also violate the law. So it's a little complicated, right? Well, the timing was right with all this, since the president of El Salvador was sitting right there as well, so he could actually comment on it. Here's what Bukele had to say about the case during the bilateral meeting at the White House yesterday, with some follow-up points from Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Watch.
Yeah, but we're not very fond of releasing terrorists into our country. We just turned the murder capital of the world into the safest country in the Western Hemisphere, and you want us to go back into releasing criminals so we can go back to being the murder capital of the world? That's not going to happen.
Well, they'd love to have a criminal, released into our country.
I mean, there's a fascination.
They would love it.
Yeah.
They're sick. These are sick people. Marco, do you have something to say?
Yeah, I mean, Stephen outlined it. I don't understand what the confusion is. This individual is a citizen of El Salvador. He was illegally in the United States and was returned to his country. That's where you deport people, back to their country of origin. Except for Venezuela, that was refusing to take people back, or places like that. I can tell you this, Mr. President. No, the foreign policy of the United States is conducted by the President of the United States, not by a court. And no court in the United States has a right to conduct the foreign policy of the United States. It's that simple. End of story.
So no refunds, right? The decision to return him would be up to El Salvador. The president of the country says it's not going to happen. And also on top of that, there were allegations that some news outlets may have even misrepresented the court order that's at the heart of the entire argument, suggesting the man should be returned to the United States. White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy Stephen Miller, he gave more details on that in that same White House meeting. Watch.
There's an illegal alien from El Salvador. So, with respect to you, he's a citizen of El Salvador. So, it's very arrogant even for American media to suggest that we would even tell El Salvador how to handle their own citizens as a starting point. As two immigration courts found that he was a member of MS-13. When President Trump declared MS-13 to be a foreign terrorist organization, that meant that he was no longer eligible under federal law, which I'm sure you know, you're very familiar with the INA, that he was no longer eligible for any form of immigration relief in the United States. So he had a deportation order that was valid, which meant that under our law, he's not even allowed to be present in the United States and had to be returned because of the foreign terrorist designation. This issue was then, by a district court judge, completely inverted, and a district court judge tried to tell the administration that they had to kidnap a citizen of El Salvador and fly him back here. That issue was raised to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said the district court order was unlawful, and its main components were reversed 9-0 unanimously, stating clearly that neither Secretary of State nor the President could be compelled by anybody to forcibly retrieve a citizen of El Salvador from El Salvador, who again is a member of MS-13, which, as I'm sure you understand, rapes little girls, murders women, murders children, is engaged in the most barbaric activities in the world, and I can promise you, if he was your neighbor, you would move right away.
So you don't plan to ask for it?
So in other words, at least according to all these top officials, the big story that was going around for weeks was fake. Yet again, Of course, you can decide which side you want to believe, the Trump cabinet and Bukele, or these news outlets. Because, again, there's discrepancies between the claims. And look, in some other news, Trump has delayed tariffs with most countries for the next 90 days. And now he's focused on a trade war, mainly just with the Chinese Communist Party. Tariffs on other countries, at least for now, have been dropped to a steady 10%. And those countries are lining up to make new trade deals. This was raised by Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett during an interview on CNN's State of the Union. Watch.
The whole point of the trade policy is to address the national emergency that we're too dependent on foreign products in the U.S., especially if we were at a time of conflict, and we're doing something about that. And the Reciprocal Act was basically, guys, if you come to the table and negotiate with us and treat us the same way we treat you, then we'll get your rate really low. And so right now, 130 countries have responded, and we're negotiating with them, and they've got their rate down to 10%. And so really, it's kind of almost a two-world system. There's a process about China, and that's very, very nascent, if at all. And then the process for everybody else. So the process for everybody else is orderly. It's clear. People are coming to town with great offers. We've got Japan, Korea, India. I was just talking to the foreign minister of India, and everything is moving forward very quickly.
In other words, it sounds like things are moving along with the United States negotiating new deals. Even Canada is coming to the table. And remember, they were the only country next to China that retaliated against the initial U.S. tariffs, and they're now moving. Now, basically, that just leaves China. The Chinese Communist Party is the last real holdout on this whole thing. And, well, they're going very far in the other direction. There was a big back and forth over CCP supplies of rare earth minerals. They've now basically cut those off. There were stories claiming that Trump put tariffs on semiconductors, then backed off. That's being delayed. But it turns out those that have been put on hold but are now on their way. Trump said earlier this week that he would announce a new non-negotiable tariff rate for imported semiconductors. And this comment was made while he was speaking to reporters aboard Air Force One. Watch.
The tariffs will be in place in the not-distant future because, as you know, like we did with steel, like we did with automobiles, like we did with aluminum, which are now fully on, we'll be doing that with semiconductors, with chips, and numerous other things. And that'll take place in the very near future.
And all the things.
And what we did is we want to uncomplicate it from a lot of companies because that's really where it should be, ideally. And we wanted to uncomplicate it from a lot of other companies because we want to make our chips and semiconductors and other things in our country. And I will tell you, another one is pharmaceuticals, drugs and pharmaceuticals. We want to make our drugs in this country. And by placing a tariff on the companies that are not in this country, they're going to move into our country and we're going to have our drugs made in the United States. So that in case of war, in case of whatever, we're not relying on China and various other countries to supply us with drugs, which is not a good idea. And it'll happen very fast. It'll all happen very fast.
So how's the CCP handling all this? Well, there's now talks of them dumping products onto the global market. And remember, this is important. This was a problem even before the recent trade war. China was having a problem of overproduction. They made too many products, they couldn't find buyers, and so they were dumping those excess products onto the global markets at lower prices, and that was causing trouble for basically everybody because it makes the prices just fall through the floor globally. And they're doing that now. The CCP is taking additional steps on that. One of them is encouraging people to buy Chinese knockoffs of really outside brands, including a lot of luxury goods. There were videos going viral on TikTok and on X, and these are Chinese nationals showing the factories that make the designer bags and other goods, and they're encouraging people to find ways to buy directly from them rather than go through the companies that hired them to make the products. Here are some of the videos. At least watch this.
You like this bag or this? $2, $2, $2, $2, all in $2. If you need bag supplier, contact me. I'm in Guangzhou.
In addition to that, there were others, including what claimed to be representatives at Chinese factories that manufacture products for some of those designer brands. They were talking about how they get materials to make the bags and other products, and then were claiming to talk about the actual cost of manufacturing versus what the products are being sold for. It looked like it was an attempt to sell up the quality of Chinese manufacturing. In reality, it kind of did the opposite. It exposed a lot of big brands are no longer really like made in Italy or something like that, or made in like other parts of Europe. Many of these are just cheap Chinese products with just a small part like that, like the handling being made in Italy or another country to get that Made in Italy label. Effectively, what the CCP is doing right now, they're running propaganda, and they're showing off these designer bags, talking about how they get different leather from different European suppliers or other places. I mean, obviously, if they were hired to produce them, they're the factory. And then they talk about the actual cost because, again, they're the sweatshop, they're the cheap manufacturers, and that's the reason companies are going there in the first place. Now, frankly, if you ask me, it just kind of makes the bags look cheap now. And if you read X in the comments, it's kind of the general impression of it. But on the other side, it also showed something else. Chinese factories are getting contracts to make these things. Western companies are doing manufacturing in China. They send them the designs, they send them the brands, they send them the materials, and CCP propaganda is trying to frame it like this is like Chinese innovation. They're just the manufacturers being hired to make these things, and they're trying to encourage people to bypass the companies to buy from them directly. And then there were others really just exposed as being fake. Take this one, for example. It's a guy showing off what he claims are Birkenstocks. This is on TikTok. Watch.
$10, $10, and $10. Always $10. We have 7 colors. Look.
So what's the problem with that video? Well, it got community noted when it was posted on X because Birkenstocks, they manufacture in Germany. They do not make them in China. So the shoes in that video, they're just Chinese knockoffs. It's Chinese counterfeits. And there were a lot of videos like these going around as well. They're kind of showcasing all their knockoff goods. The real irony is that these videos will probably hurt European luxury brands and not really so much the US ones. They're mostly just bombing all the European luxury brands right now by doing this. Given that these seem to be in response to the trade war, I don't know, is it beneficial for them to hurt the EU? You decide. Now, it'll likely also make some companies think twice about their operations in China because some of these Chinese factories are literally promoting their gray markets. And this is what they do. These Chinese companies, they'll get the contracts to make the products from other countries. They get hired to make them. They get the materials, orders, and everything else. And then they run side operations where they make knockoffs to sell for their own profit. Now, the issue is the knockoffs are made with the same designs and same materials sometimes, or sometimes very similar ones, but again, they're knockoffs. And Chinese companies do that to undercut the companies that hired them to do it in the first place. And so the irony is these videos are just putting these gray markets on display. Now, this also ties into the narratives coming from the Trump side right now, that the Chinese Communist Party has been effectively cheating and stealing as its entire economic model for decades. This is Stephen Miller on Fox News, Sunday Morning Futures with Maria Bartiromo, discussing this and also pointing to the goal of the current trade war. Watch.
90-day pause before the tariff rates snap back gives us an opportunity to have that conversation with each of these countries and to deal with these long-running, severe and systemic abuses, while at the same time, and very importantly, focusing all of our attention and the attention of the entire international community on how China has distorted the entire global trading system through decades of intellectual property theft, trademark theft, copyright theft, industrial espionage, currency manipulation, illegal subsidization of critical industries, targeted dumping to destroy core manufacturing capacity in other countries so that they cannot protect and defend themselves in a time of national emergency. These are state-led policies from China that require redress, and the only scandal is that it took so long for us to finally have a president in Donald Trump who will protect and defend America from these abuses, while every other president, Democrat and Republican, allowed China to plunder us to a degree that was so savage and so total, it honestly eclipses the imagination.
It really does.
Now, in other news, Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg is facing an antitrust trial. This is alongside congressional investigations into the company. And this could actually see Meta get broken up. It's also exposing something else, alleged CCP interference, including deals for censorship. Now, first off on the antitrust trial, this is BBC, it says this. A trial in the landmark antitrust case against social media giant Meta kicked off in Washington on Monday. It says lawyers for the U.S. Competition and Consumer Watchdog allege Meta unlawfully quashed rivals by purchasing Instagram and WhatsApp over a decade ago. Remember the context of this? Donald Trump has now signed an executive order against monopolies. Now, technically, this antitrust violation predates that, but one of the concerns with Meta, again, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, is they're taking over online chat and online social networks and effectively running them in ways that, at least until recently, have been censoring people. And here's what they say, quote, they decided that competition was too hard and it would be easier to buy out their rivals than to compete with them, said Federal Trade Commission FTC lawyer Daniel Matheson. It notes that Meta countered that, the lawsuit from the FTC, which reviewed and approved those acquisitions as misguided, suggesting the FTC approved it. The counterpoint from the Trump team as well, that was the old team, this is the new one. And they say this, quote, Meta acquired Instagram and WhatsApp to improve and grow them alongside Facebook, the company's attorney Mark Hansen argued. It notes that a win by the FTC could force CEO Mark Zuckerberg to break up the company. And that could include spinning off the photo sharing app Instagram and messaging service WhatsApp, meaning maybe 3 different companies instead of just one. Now, notice the FTC says the company overpaid when it acquired Instagram for $1 billion in 2012. 2 years later, it purchased the WhatsApp for $19 billion. A big difference in money. Now, notice that on Monday, Matheson referenced a 2012 memo from Zuckerberg in which he discussed the importance of, quote, neutralizing Instagram. And that is a pretty bad paper to have out there, the discussion of neutralizing a competitor. Now, Matheson called the message, quote, a smoking gun. And it notes that Meta, on the other hand, said the purchases made the consumer experience better. Now, this comes at an interesting time for the company. Zuckerberg's having a change of face. He's taking a very different political stance. He had what some people call his glow up. He has a tan now and looks a little more like bulky. He's been working out. But he's taken a very different stance also on the political stage. Back in 2020, remember, Zuckerberg was accused of election programs, remember the Zuck Bucks, that have benefited Democrats a lot more than they did Republicans. Now, some critics suggested that could have violated election laws, but we never really saw any cases on that. Nothing ever happened. And then in 2024, Zuckerberg took a very different position, where he was seemed at least, heavy with the Democrats in 2020. During the 2024 election, he appeared to have warmed up to the new Trump presidency. Now, his companies are also starting to drop some of their censorship programs, and it seems that at the very least, he's standing on the sidelines saying, I'm not going to get involved in partisan politics, to an extent. At the same time, though, he and other big tech CEOs, they're also working with the Trump administration to fight back against like European censorship, especially when it comes to the rolling fines they're putting on American companies just about every year. Zuckerberg has been very outspoken on that. And also, Zuckerberg has alleged that many of those policies for censorship were implemented through government pressure, including in the United States. And he has also since started removing the fact checkers from Facebook under claims that the fact checkers likewise seem to censor according to their own bias. How do you monitor the monitors, right? But the whole censorship debate is far from over. A Facebook whistleblower recently exposed the alleged relations that Facebook had with the Chinese Communist Party. This is BBC. It says, a former Facebook executive has told the BBC how the social media giant worked hand in glove with the Chinese government on potential ways of allowing Beijing to censor and control content in China. Now, notes that Sarah Wynne Williams, a former global public policy director, says in return for gaining access to the Chinese market of hundreds of millions of users, Facebook's founder Mark Zuckerberg considered, suggesting maybe he didn't fully do it, but considered agreeing to hiding posts that were going viral until they could be checked by Chinese authorities. And notice that Ms. Williams, who makes the claims in a new book, has also filed a whistleblower complaint with U.S. market regulators, the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, alleging Meta misled investors, which means it could be criminal. And notes the BBC has reviewed the complaint as well. And in her SEC complaint, Ms. Wynne Williams also alleges Mr. Zuckerberg and other Meta executives had made, quote, misleading statements in response to congressional inquiries about China. Now, one answer given by Mr. Zuckerberg to Congress in 2018 said Facebook was not in a position to know exactly how the Chinese government would seek to apply its laws and regulations on content. Meta told the BBC that Mr. Zuckerberg gave accurate testimony, adding it did not operate services in China. The caveat there would be if he had communications with them, which would have given them that information. And again, you could decide maybe in a court of law whether that would be giving false testimony or not. Well, look, we can get some answers on all these things pretty soon, though. Zuckerberg is now being called in to testify before Congress. And The Hill said this: Senator Josh Hawley called on Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg to testify before Congress after a former Facebook employee, the one we just discussed, alleged the company repeatedly undermined U.S. national security and said, quote, the American people deserve to know the truth about your company, Hawley wrote in a letter to Zuckerberg on Thursday and added, quote, the public deserves to hear your response to these serious allegations, particularly since they pertain to American national security. Now, notes that Hawley requested Zuckerberg testify before the Senate Judiciary Crime and Counterterrorism Subcommittee in an upcoming hearing titled A Time for Truth, Part 2, Oversight of Meta's Foreign Relations and Representations to the United States. Now, notes the letter came one day after the same subcommittee heard from Sarah Wynne Williams, the former director of global public policy at Facebook, who told lawmakers Meta executives repeatedly, quote, betrayed American values during her 7 years of the company. And notes as well that Wynne Williams accused Meta executives of working to, quote, win favor with leaders in Beijing to build an $18 billion business in China. And remember the viral video of Zuckerberg having Xi Jinping's book on his desk, right? They were courting them, also going for a jog in Beijing, enjoying that fresh Beijing air. But look, this is an ongoing investigation. We could get some answers soon, but the investigations of Meta, which includes Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, could also be the start of this whole debate. Google is also facing similar antitrust investigations. Right now, it's not just, again, Meta. There are other companies facing very similar investigations, and Google has also faced many of the same allegations. Allegations of ties to the Chinese Communist Party, including with censorship outside of China. So we'll very likely have a lot more information on all that pretty soon. And look, speaking of Google, they're facing other problems. I'll be talking about this more after we come back from a quick break.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. Google may be in trouble because look, quick question, how many of you still use Google for your searches? For those of you who still use it, do you believe it gives you accurate results free from any kind of political bias? Well, if you said no to either of those, you're not alone. Alphabet, which Google is under, is really not doing well right now. And there are reports suggesting it's trending in similar ways to Kodak before the company went down. MarketWatch said this. In addition, Alphabet now has a branding problem. Google is a verb, but its Gemini artificial intelligence offering is not. ChatGPT, however, has verb status with younger users, like Grok does as well, who notes that Ben Tienses of Melius Research wrote, will say things like that they ChatGPT'd their papers for school. And it notes that while OpenAI could see $12.7 billion in revenue from subscriptions this year, Reitz expressed doubts that Google could squeeze that much money out of Gemini subscriptions. Who's using Gemini, right? It says OpenAI does not show advertisements currently, but if it did, quote, advertisers would have to respect its youthful user base, according to Reitz. And he said, how could at least 20% of the world's search ad budget, about $40 billion, not go to OpenAI when they eventually figure this out? Meaning, Google has a monopoly. What happens when you lose that monopoly? Well, you can only go down. You can't go up. And they add this. From a stock perspective, he added that the Kodak example is a cautionary tale. Kodak stock saw its forward price to earnings multiples fall from 20 times to 7 times over 3 years. Kodak was once the Dow Jones Industrial Average, but now has a market capitalization of only about $500 million. And Google could be going the way of Kodak. Now look, that's also becoming a trend. A lot of people are now turning to tools like OpenAI. Some people use Grok as their replacement for online search. Instead of going on Google, they're going on, again, maybe X and typing in Grok what they want to know. Some say that it's less censored. Some say it gives better search results. Depends on what you're looking for, I guess. But all it could take is one of those companies creating an online portal or something to have ads similar to Google, which means they siphon out that money to do searches, and then boom, that could be the end of Google as we know it. Now, personally, I'd say Google has made itself irrelevant because of censorship. Now, people have pointed to the censored search results that only show what are deemed as reputable sources, but often just represent censorship along partisan lines. If you search for certain narratives, you're probably not going to find them on Google. You're going to find just the curated results of all the big corporate media and a whole lot of nothing else. And also, you know, a lot of the top results are just sponsored posts. And people have raised this issue as well. If you type in a search, you get a long list of sponsored things, some recommendations, and then after that, just a curated list of the big corporate media basically giving their take on things. Google used to be a lot more useful. You used to be able to type in and it would find what you're actually looking for. But now, I'd say because of censorship, and maybe a lot of greed possibly, people are turning to other tools that are not as censored. They're probably still censored, but not nearly as much. And what happens then? If one of those tools that people are now turning to anyway releases something that could easily replace what Google has to offer for the average person, well, that kind of change can make a company go belly up overnight. Now, that said, let me know if you still use Google, you think it's fantastic. If not, what do you use as a search engine? I'm curious. Leave a comment below this video. Also, don't forget to hit the like button, and let's jump into some questions. All right, first off, Ashley from California, you're saying, can someone explain who exactly thought it was a good idea to rely on China for necessary medication supplies. Yeah, a lot of this was just a long-term thing. A lot of this was long-term. And so it was Chinese the CCP regards this as war, Chinese business warfare. And so it's the gradual taking over of industries. Some would call it industrial warfare, which is the battle not just for the businesses, but for everything around them. Supply chains, logistics, natural resources. Even as part of the One Belt, One Road initiative, where they're going to other countries, part of the contract with the debt traps is the CCP was gaining control over natural resources in like Latin America and Africa and other countries. So they've been conquering. They've been conquering by other means. Now, when it comes to medications, a lot of medications come from China. Even a lot of medications made in other countries have some ingredients from China. They've established a monopoly on that. Now, it's not to say they control everything. We can find other sources for it. It's in the works right now. Trump actually announced just recently that he secured a deal from a European company. I want to say it's like Finnish, but it's a European company. And they're going to be building pharmaceutical production in the United States. It's a pretty big deal he made. Another question here, DC's B's, you're saying Google searches are too weighted by their marketing for good results. Yeah, it's a problem, right? I see TMA saying DuckDuckGo. I was using DuckDuckGo for a while as well. I find that they're kind of, at least in my opinion, they're becoming just as censored as Google. Ironically, Bing, right? Microsoft's Bing gives okay results, at least in my opinion, but I tend to not really trust a lot of them. I was using Brave Search for a while. I find that they also seem to censor in line with most of these other policies. It's really hard to find a company that does not have some degree of what looks like partisan censorship. They're great if you want to search mainstream media. They're not so great if you want to search alternative media. They don't really weigh them the same. And so, or for example, finding reports and especially finding older information. It does look like a lot of stuff just gets scrubbed. And so I don't find search results to be nearly as useful as they used to. Even some of the functions Google used to have in the early days was fantastic. I actually, as a journalist, I remember the headquarters of Google in New York. They actually had a program for journalists one time where you went there and they teach you how to use all these advanced search techniques. Super useful class. But most of the techniques they had, they've since removed. They used to have it where you could find almost anything if you knew some of the technical things you could do with Google. They've removed so much of it. They've dumbed it down so much that it's just ridiculous. I actually used to really like RSS as well, like RSS feeds, because I had it set up where I could curate different niche topics and stuff, and I could basically just get a daily update every day, just anything I wanted to know. It was fantastic. It's actually crazy to think in some ways that the internet has kind of become less responsive and less useful. And I do think that's tied into two things. One, mid-2000s, you're talking 2005 when a lot of this stuff started, to 2010. Remember that 2008 was the iPhone boom and everything. That was the golden age of the internet. That was when a lot of these companies were fairly new. There were not a lot of regulations. Free speech was abundant. Free speech was great at that time. And again, these platforms really had some cool, innovative technologies that they've since removed. That was the high point of it because it was less regulated. The companies were not censoring hardly at all, maybe a little too little in some cases, but it was pretty good. And then what happened, I think, was frankly, when Trump ran for office the first time, 2015, 2016, that was when you saw the censorship hammer just slam down. And a lot of these platforms became really, really dumbed down. They kicked people off of them. I mean, it was terrible. Then you had some corporate greed. Companies trying to strike deals with the Chinese Communist parties we're seeing here, and them censoring. Companies getting pressure from governments, China, Europe, Brazil, all kinds of other countries forcing their laws onto these globalist tech companies, which are technically American companies. And so between greed, between just the expansion of business practices, between government censorship, international censorship, and then just people being offended by everything, the internet has become a lot less free, I think. Now, some people are hoping AI is going to fix some of that. It depends. I think it really depends. There's a big legal argument right now over OpenAI and Sam Altman. There are people saying that it was supposed to be open source, meaning not necessarily a for-profit business. You make something open source, it means you can go in, mess with the code. It's kind of free for everyone. There are some national security concerns with that, I understand, and so they might not want to do that, especially because China could just rip it off and copy it basically. But there are some interests with that. Grok is emerging, with Elon Musk is kind of the relative free speech version of AI, and then you have other ones like Gemini and such, which, I don't know if it's as useful as Google search. I don't consider it useful. I would say too censored, too at risk of being censored. And the issue is not just the way it is currently, it's the way it will become over the course of time as they get additional pressure with that. And frankly, I'd say that a purely open system is one thing. A censored system, especially when you're implementing it for everything, is kind of terrifying. If you let AI take over everything and kids are writing their papers on it and writers are writing books using it and history books and research is being done with it, what happens when you start disappearing information? What happens when researchers and students and journalists all use a technology for their research and that research tool eliminates key pieces of information? It means you've then enacted a form of just global censorship and nobody can find their way out of it. I think it's terrible. But hopefully we'll avoid that future, right? California guy, you're saying, what are the chances El Salvador would send one of their own citizens to the USA? On the other hand, does El Salvador want a terrorist in their country? So the way it's being argued is this. This goes back to the individual who the corporate media claim was accidentally deported to El Salvador. I know there's some government reports. It's a mess. The whole narrative is all over the place. But here's basically where it's at. The guy is an El Salvador citizen. He was determined by 2 different courts to be a member of the MS-13 gang, which is now designated as a terrorist organization. El Salvador has very strict laws on MS-13. They also treat the gang like a terrorist organization. They treat them like, you're going to be in jail for a long time if you even have an MS-13 tattoo. And so if this guy was found guilty, or not found guilty, but determined to be a gang member of MS-13 twice by 2 different courts, El Salvador is going to recognize that. They also have their own books. They'll check on it. They're holding him as well. He is a citizen of El Salvador, not of the United States, meaning he's under El Salvador law, not American law. This is where the complication is with sending him back. The United States is paying for the facility in which he's being held, right? We're paying El Salvador to hold our prisoners. That guy was deported along with the other people who we are paying, the United States, to house these prisoners. And it's not clear whether that individual is, again, whether the United States is paying for him to be jailed or if El Salvador is picking up the tab. Maybe they'll change his status and just relinquish him to the country of El Salvador rather than have him through the U.S. agreement. That would probably remove some of the problems with this, and so that's where things are at. They're also saying that these judges do not have the jurisdiction to be doing this, to order the President of the United States to return a bunch of gang members, let alone have jurisdiction outside the borders of the United States where they can make judgments for other countries to force them to do something in line with American law. The Supreme Court already made that determination 9-0. That was the actual context of that. The judges don't have that jurisdiction. But even that's been misrepresented by a lot of news outlets. So it's kind of where things are at. Old Bean Blower, you're saying, I feel sorry for the people of China. Their life is already garbage because of the CCP. And now they're the ones that are going to suffer the most in this trade war. Sucks to live in China. I was thinking the same thing. Okay, I'll give you one example. So there's a couple things. If you read what sellers are saying in China, they're freaking out. The companies that manufacture products, again, even the people who were doing business on Shein and Temu and Amazon, this is detrimental to them. Now, the only hope they have is if they can dump their products on the markets of other countries. They can dump their products in Africa. They can dump their products in Latin America. They can dump their products in Asia. Dumping them in Europe will be hard because Europe has been blocking some of that, as have some Asian countries, meaning they're kind of left with Africa and Latin America, which are not known for having a lot of buying power. Let's put it that way, especially not just cheap goods like this. The other side is Chinese manufacturing. It doesn't have a good reputation. Even though they can make these luxury brands, which is what people are showcasing right now, Chinese quality does not have a good reputation. It has a very bad reputation. If you see a made in China label on a product, you usually think it's trash. You know what I mean? It means usually that it's not very good quality. And that's just the reputation they've gotten. Even though it does not apply to everything, right? There are some stuff these days that's actually made okay. Not everything by far, but some stuff's made okay. And so they're trying to promote that right now, which is where you see a lot of these propaganda videos where these Chinese factories, you have guys speaking English, meaning they're trying to talk to people outside of China. They're not talking to Chinese. They're speaking English, and they're trying to sell up the quality of Chinese manufacturing. Now, what are they doing with that? They're saying, we can do this, we can make this. Why would you go through these Western brands and have them pay us to make this when you could just come to us and buy this from us? Now, it's actually a very stupid move. It's a really stupid move. Because look, what do you call that? You call that a gray market. If a company hires a Chinese factory to make a product for them, and then the factory starts publishing videos saying how cheap their manufacturing is. Hey, we're a bunch of cheap manufacturers, and they're undermining the reputation of the brand that hired them to make the product. Do you think that company wants to have that continued relationship? Probably not. And so what these companies are going to have to do, and I'm talking these are major Louis Vuitton and Gucci and stuff like that. These are the ones getting dragged through the mud right now with this whole propaganda battle. These companies are going to have to do damage control. They're going to have to do damage control and repair their reputations. Now, what does that mean? Even aside from the fact that their factories in China are basically going rogue right now, right? And again, some of this is not even the companies that manufacture. Some of them are actual just Chinese knockoff companies, and they're publishing videos showing products they don't even make. But regardless, even aside from the fact that the companies are going rogue, they're turning on the businesses that hired them to make the products. Even aside from that, these other companies now have to break that brand, that bad branding. And they have to say, no, we're not just manufacturing cheap Chinese-made products. These are not, cheap made-in-China products that we're selling at like a 10 times or 40 times markup. They mark them up a lot. They have to change that now. And so I guarantee what you're going to watch is some of those brands are going to promote made in Italy or made in America or made in Bangladesh. I don't know, maybe made somewhere else, but not made in China. The CCP, whether this is them or not, and I assume it is because they control all these programs and algorithms, when you have a massive propaganda campaign like this and it's coming from multiple sources, usually it's because the CCP is behind it. They wouldn't let it happen otherwise. All these people now are doing this, and it's going to force these companies to take that manufacturing back if they want to save their reputations. Now, one more quick thing on this. In terms of the trade war with China, the other big thing you saw recently, one of the Chinese government officials, like one of their spokespersons, published a video online of Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong declaring basically the Chinese people are willing to fight to the end. And people pointed out the context of that video they posted. Now, from their side, they were saying, China strong together, right? They were trying to say that. And they were posting these videos of Mao talking about how they'll basically endure anything. People were quick to point out that the speech from Mao Zedong was right before he starved millions of Chinese people to death during the Great Leap Forward. Right before he caused famines that killed people by the millions in China. And the connotation of that was basically the CCP is willing to kill as many of its own people as it has to. It's willing to starve them, it's willing to impoverish them, it's willing to abuse them, it's willing to make them suffer as much as it wants. It will do anything to them, even if it kills them, in order to win this trade war. And that's the basic message they were sending. Now, I don't think a lot of Chinese are going to be like, hey, yeah, to death and glory, comrade. Let's get back those shoe factories. Yeah, I've always wanted to die for like a Louis Vuitton bag factory. Let's march forward, comrade. Like, do you think they're saying that? No, of course they don't, right? They're not in for that. And so what's happening now is the CCP is effectively declaring it will abuse its own people to the most extreme degrees it has to. It will do anything to win this trade war. And, for the Chinese people now, they're kind of caught in between that. We will see what happens, though, because I think you're going to see a lot of social unrest. You were already starting to see it, even, for example, the manufacturers for like Temu and Shein, even under the previous trade agreements, a lot of them were barely scraping by. And that was why they were protesting. They were protesting outside the headquarters of these companies. Things are even worse for them now. And again, one of the big important pieces that a lot of people are missing with this is the dumping. There were anti-dumping laws before this current trade war. Basically, China had a problem of oversupply. They made too much. That includes, by the way, on rare earth minerals. They mined too much. They mined too deep. And they have too much stuff. And again, they have no place to dump it now. They can't even really sell it without having to pay like a premium. And so this is really messing them up. And any country that does not tariff them right now risks having China dump these products on their market and crash the value within those markets. And that's where things are at with this. Korean Yon, you're saying, how does an illegal have protected status? Okay, so this is the context. Okay, so I believe it was the Daily Beast, or maybe it was one of these media, maybe it was the Atlantic. They noted that this individual, this guy who was accidentally deported, was an individual with protected status. This is the context of that. The Biden administration gave temporary protection status, right? TPS, temporary protection status, to several groups of illegal aliens. These were mainly the people brought in through like facilitated mass migration. That was Venezuelans, that was people from Haiti, that was a lot of these groups. El Salvador, I guess, was grouped into it as well. And so these people were given pseudo-legal status, right? People from Ukraine were given it, for example. And what that meant was that they were protected. They were technically still illegal immigrants, but they were given temporary legal status, meaning you could not deport them, and they were eligible also for various government programs because of that protection status. Now, the Trump administration revoked that protection. And you might have seen the recent news. Trump revoked the status of close to 1 million people. Basically, everybody who used the CBP One app to come to the United States, they revoked every one of those people's status. And a judge, it seems to be the pattern, a judge is blocking Trump from revoking the protection status of these individuals. Because, as I mentioned last week, the Trump administration, they put into action a massive self-deportation program where anybody who is now an illegal immigrant, including if you're overstaying your visa, including if you previously had protection status and it has since been revoked, they've now been given orders to leave, or if you were just an actual, like, just run-of-your-mill illegal immigrant and you snuck across the border. All of them now have been given orders to leave, which means now if they don't register for removal or take steps for removal, under current law, which went into effect on last Friday, they now face criminal prosecution. They face fines. The current on-the-book fine is $500 every single day they do not self-deport. The Trump administration raised that, they're talking about raising it to $998 every single day, including retroactively up to $1 million. And they're also facing even prison. There are people going to prison now who are illegal immigrants solely for the crime of entering the country illegally. And so that's where things are at with it. The judge orders coming in right now blocking Trump are basically blocking these actions from going into effect. And I think from that side, remember what I said. I told you this is going to happen, right? What did I say before Trump's inauguration? What was happening? Trump won the election. Even before he won, actually, they were doing this. There were news articles saying that government officials, activist organizations, judges, and these NGOs and everything else were quote-unquote wargaming the Trump administration. They even had people who were formerly in the previous Trump administration. They were wargaming it to plan legal actions, the use of the legal system, to block and delay Donald Trump. And they want to do this, I would assume, until probably the midterms, when Democrats believe they may be able to win back some seats in the House or Senate, and then they can undermine Trump. They can undermine Trump not just through the legal system, they can do it through Congress, right? And I think that's their plan. As things currently stand right now, Trump is facing a lot of legal pushback. He's just ignoring some of that, but it is having the effect of delaying a lot of what I think he wanted to achieve. But I think this is going to be the big thing. Right now, with the tariffs and everything else and the bad press, and Trump getting blocked on a lot of things, some Democrat media suggests that Trump is losing the faith of Republicans, and that's the big narrative going around. That is not being reflected in polling. And so I would question what their data is based on. Some people have also pointed out that when, I won't name the media, but a lot of these big corporate media, they have guests on who claim to be, former Republicans, and you look at their credentials, you find them online, and they're like Democrat operatives. You know what I mean? So they're misrepresenting some information. But I think the idea that they have strategically is if they can delay Trump from enacting the policies he says he's going to enact, and if they can skew the image of the current ones, like the trade war right now, if Trump cannot succeed in this in a way that benefits Americans, they seem to believe that this will help them in the midterms. And if they can just delay things enough and stop things enough and make sure that stuff doesn't work out so well, people will become disenfranchised with Trump enough, or Republicans enough, that they'll vote for Democrats. And the other thing too, and this is big for the elections, a lot of conservatives are not necessarily Republicans. And this is shown oftentimes when, a lot of people are Trump supporters, but they're not necessarily Republican supporters. And so when you have an official running for Congress, sometimes Trump supporters will not vote for the Republican. And so they're counting on that as well. Let's see here, another question. Diana Wheaton, you're saying, talk about burning bridges. You're talking about the Chinese manufacturing. China probably could have swayed Canada and Europe to their side, but not after betraying the businesses that work with them by dumping goods. Who would ever want to work with them? Yeah, I don't think a lot of people understand the importance of the dumping issue. And I know it's not getting a lot of press coverage, that's probably why. Okay, let's go back a little bit, because this is actually really important, and it's one of the bigger points being left out of the debate with the trade war with China. The anti-dumping issue is what will cause a lot of other countries to follow in America's footsteps to tariff China. Because this is why, right? This is why. Let me explain. Prior to the trade war, there were articles going around of overcapacity in China, overproduction. Do you remember those headlines? This was before it was controversial. There was overproduction in China. They had excess goods. They built too much stuff. They made too many products, and they could not find buyers. They could not find buyers. The allegation was that China was going to dump these assets on the markets. This included like natural resources, copper, metals, products, finished products, cars, electric cars. They were dumping these products on the market, and Europe was putting tariffs on China to prevent that. Canada was putting tariffs on China to prevent that. Even Asian countries and other countries were putting things in place to prevent China from dumping products on their markets because they had to protect their own manufacturers. Now, what does this also mean? If the Chinese Communist Party, their problem at the time was they could not find enough buyers for their products. And now America has put massive tariffs on China. The United States, representing about more than 34% of global consumption. It's crazy how much Americans buy. Meaning we have a lot of buying power, and we don't really make a lot these days, right? So it's a lot of that is foreign business. You cut that off. You cut off de minimis. You cut off the ability of China to ship directly from factory to individual using Shein and Temu. You cut all that off. And remember, there were African countries restricting that. This was not even just first world countries. You had countries in Africa stopping China from doing this. What happens then when America puts 145% tariffs on the Chinese Communist Party, and they have all that excess product? In addition to the existing overproduction, they've now lost a market of about 34% of global global consumption. Huge market lost, or they have to pay a lot more to ship here, which would put a lot of people out of business alone. In addition to the fact that the U.S. has now eliminated de minimis, which basically does away with Shein and Temu. In addition to the fact that all the Chinese retailers on Amazon, representing about 50% of the retailers on Amazon are Chinese, suddenly cannot sell at competitive values. What does that mean? It means you need to find buyers for products that you already had overproduction on. And how are you going to find buyers? So here's what they're going to do. They're going to dump that on other countries. And so if countries don't want to have their economies destroyed by China, which is what dumping will do, which is why people were stopping them from doing it before this trade war, they have to put tariffs on China, which means what? They're going to probably work with the United States in a trade war against the Chinese Communist Party to protect their own economies from being destroyed by dumping. It's a big deal, actually, and I have not seen, I don't think I've seen any economists raise this point, actually, in the current debate. I don't think anybody's talking about it, actually, but in my opinion, that's the biggest issue. That is the biggest, one of the big cards Trump has to play on that big table right now. So get ready for that. All right, folks, that said, it's Monday, so happy Monday. Please don't forget to like this video. It does help us in the algorithm. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think of the show. Criticisms, questions, feedback. Let me know. I appreciate it. That said, join me again tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time, folks. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.